This is your Tuesday Daily Delivery. I am Michael Rand. Hope everyone's having a great day today. If I sound a little tired today, maybe it's because I was at a concert on Monday night. My wife and I took our daughters to the JoJo Siwa concert at Target Center. It was a ton of fun, but not used to doing things quite like that for a while now, and so maybe a little bit of energy drain last night. But I'm rallying right now, knowing that I'm excited to talk about all these things today. Coming up in the show a little bit later, Jim Souhan will join me, of course, columnist for the Star Tribune. We're going to talk about a bunch of things, including Lindsay Whalen and her job status, how she's doing, what Jim thinks of kind of how much time she should be given to turn this program around, because it has not been going great so far, if we're being honest. So a little bit on that with Jim, some talk about the Timberwolves with Jim, and some talk about the NFL hiring coaching process, including the search that led the Vikings to hire Kevin O'Connell. So plenty of good stuff coming up with Jim Souhan in a little bit. Have to revisit some NBA trade deadline stuff. Jim and I got into that a little bit with the Timberwolves, but there's a big discussion brewing with the 76ers and the Nets that is frankly pretty interesting to me as well. But first, what did I miss? Jesse Diggins did it again. The skier from Afton, Minnesota, raced very early for us on Tuesday morning and became the first women's cross-country skier from the U.S. to win an individual medal at the Beijing Games. She took the bronze in the women's freestyle sprint, finishing in a time of 3 minutes, 12 seconds, and 3 minutes, 12.84 seconds. Had kind of worked her way up through the different heats, had the second fastest time in the quarterfinals, did just fine in the semifinals, and then took home the bronze. That was very recently. Sounds like it was a cold day there. I'm just reading from Rachel Blount's very fresh story, StarTribune.com. You should go and check that out. I'm sure there'll be more detail as the day goes on, including some more comments from Jesse Diggins, but. Just an amazing set of events again for Jesse Diggins. Of course, at the last Winter Olympics in 2018, she had partnered with Keegan Randall, won the gold in the team sprint event in those Olympics, and this time around, it's just these sprint races in cross country skiing are just brutal. You remember her collapsing at the finish line last time with the race she did in 2018, and then this time it's kind of the same thing. It's just all out. It's like watching a track race where it's somewhere between a distance and a sprint race where you're just going as fast as you can. But it's not just for a minute. For in her case, it was a little over 3 minutes to be going all out for that long of a time is just it's really hard. I mean, think about hockey shifts. Think about when you watch a hockey game. Those guys are going all out, but their shifts are usually about 45 seconds. So, and when they get back to the bench, they are gassed. A race like this is four or five times as long as that. Just physically exhausting to be going all out for that length of time. So, congratulations to Jesse Diggins. She's got more races coming up, of course, in these games. Now, I admit I haven't watched a whole lot of Olympics yet, haven't really gotten into it yet. I'm sure I will. It kind of takes me a little time to warm up to them a lot of times as the events go on, but this is a race I'm going to want to go back and watch again for sure, because that's just the drama of a sprint race like that captures me, and I'm looking forward to that. So again, congrats to Jesse Diggins, and more to come from her at these games.
Take a playcation to Mystic Lake for 24/7 gaming, fun restaurants and bars, and luxurious hotel rooms. And join Club M to bask in the rewards. Follow the lights to Mystic Lake, where every day is play day.
Like to welcome back Jim Souhan, Star Tribune columnist, to Daily Delivery. Jim's written a couple things lately that I wanted to pick his brain on a little bit more. But before that, just saying hi, Jim. How you doing?
I think I'm okay. Other than winter and COVID, and but you know what? For once, we don't really have to complain about the local sports teams.
That's true.
I mean, the Wolves are a blast. The Wild's a blast. well, I guess we could find local sports teams to complain about, but I think the fact that the Timberwolves are actually both good and fun and good in a sustainable way, it does brighten the winter for me.
I agree. And we'll get to the Wolves in a little bit. But maybe before we duck out of that thought, when they made the playoffs a few years ago in that Jimmy Butler season, the whole year still felt like kind of this joyless march to 47 wins. This feels different, even if they're not probably as good as that team was.
And you know why it felt like a joyless march to 47 wins?
Because it was
a joyless march to 47 wins. We all knew there was nothing sustainable about any of that. Tom Thibodeau's personality, the way people in the organization reacted to Thibodeau, Jimmy Butler being a complete, what word can I use on a Star Tribune podcast? Jerk is probably the nice generic word we use. It had no chance of lasting at all. And it was a talented team. It was an interesting team to watch, but it was never fun. This team's actually fun.
Yes, agreed. And we'll talk about them more in a little bit. I wanted to talk to you about column you wrote for, I believe it was for Monday's paper, about Lindsay Whalen and just the direction of that Gophers women's basketball program. And you had been getting asked a lot of the same things I've been getting asked, and frankly, that I've wondered a little bit out loud about. Like, this is year 4 for Lindsay Whalen in that program, hired right out of the Lynx. Even she was still playing for the Lynx when she got hired. No previous coaching experience, but, fantastic player. That probably doesn't even do justice to her impact, but they've not been, not been great on the court. And so the rumblings of how long does she get to turn this program into what they hope it can be. And you tackled that subject in Monday's paper.
Yeah. And listen, it's absolutely fair to question the direction of the program and to say that they haven't done enough, that they haven't won enough, because they haven't won enough. I still go back to what I said and thought at the time, which is, most Big Ten coaches, they have to win 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 other places just to get a chance to take over a Big Ten program. Lindsay Whalen hadn't coached a day in her life. And I remember talking to Cheryl Reeve about this, and Cheryl wasn't criticized. Cheryl was thrilled that Lindsay got the job and thinks she'll succeed. But she was saying, I asked her, what's the difference? She said, when you're a player, you do your work in 2-3 hour spurts. There's a point of diminishing returns on your body. You can only work out so hard. You can only work out so long. And you go take naps in the afternoon and you come back and play the games. And everything's these condensed bursts of hard work. When you're a coach of a program at any level, you're responsible for everything. You get asked to make 100 decisions a day. It is incredibly difficult. It's wearing. It's why we see coaches burn out. It's why we see so many coaches be grumpy. I think even those of us who thought it would be a large learning curve still underestimated the learning curve. And I think, she's also coached a couple of players that left the program. I think both were Stallings recruits. I'm sure Lindsay came in and said, we're going to do things this way. I'm not sure it was all that well received. So for me, especially given where that program has been in general, when they haven't had Lindsay Whalen on the roster, I'm very willing to wait until I see what she does with a couple of great recruiting classes. Now, if Lindsay Whalen gets to a point where she's recruited unprecedented recruiting classes to that campus, and as seniors, they still haven't won anything, then I think you have to say, okay, well, maybe she's, even if she's a great recruiter, she's not a good coach. But I don't think we know enough about her yet as a coach to make any even non-hasty judgments at this point.
I agree with that. And another thing that I had Pam Borton, the former Gophers coach, on the show a couple of weeks ago. And one thing she was saying about, coaching, and especially as it relates to Whalen, is, when you're a player, especially like Whalen, you're wired a certain way to be just more competitive than almost anybody else we know. And, she might not, she's got kind of an understated way of showing it sometimes, but it definitely comes out. She is a fierce competitor. When you're a coach, you all of a sudden have to depend on other people to have that within you, and you can only motivate them so much. And I wonder if that's an adjustment point for her too, just like understanding that, she has to let other people do, she has to push the right buttons to get people motivated. Maybe she's motivated in a certain way and other people have to be motivated in a different way.
And there is a long history at high level sports of great players not necessarily turning into great coaches or managers because they're like, well, why didn't you just do what I did? And whether it's their level of competitiveness or their skill, other people can't do it. A lot of other people can't even relate to it. And here's Whalen, who is the greatest winner in Minnesota history, who's won at everything she's ever done, who hates losing, and she's having to coach players that she didn't necessarily recruit, who might be okay with being 500 or might be okay with, having a losing record. And I'm not sure she's known how to do it because her realm of experience is Olympians and Maya Moore and Simone Augustus and Sylvia Fowles and Cheryl Reeve. And now all of a sudden she takes over a program that frankly has not been a good program when she hasn't been involved in it in general. And, and I'm not getting this from Lindsay, I'm getting this from people around Lindsay. I think it has been a shock to her system that anybody who steps on a basketball court can't do what she did and doesn't necessarily think the way she thought.
Now you're close with Paul Molitor, another, fantastic player who made that transition into the dugout, obviously in baseball. How did he deal with that?
I actually was really impressed with the way Paul dealt with it because I did wonder, Paul carried himself like a Hall of Famer, even for people who liked him and he was very accessible to. It was the Paul Molitor experience, yes, I'm going to talk to you and yes, I'm going to be accessible and I'm going to tell you a funny story, but hey, I am Paul Molitor. There's a presence around people like that. And I found when he became manager, he really submerged his ego. And what I really liked about him as a manager is I would see him talking to the 25th guy on the roster. I would see him talking about guys about getting sent down or getting called up and saying, hey, we're going to find a role. I thought he handled it really well. If he had a failing as a manager, it might have been just that he didn't think the way that the new front office thought. I think the new front office is like, okay, our data says that Jake Odorizzi should be pulled after, 74 pitches. After that point, he gets hammered, and Molitor took the player view, which is, well, if we don't let him pitch past 74 pitches, he's never going to get good at pitching past 74 pitches. So I think it was more of that and the fact that the new guys were going to hire their own person eventually anyway. So he was kind of a lame duck. I think that's what doomed his Twins managing career. I thought he was a really smart manager and a very good guy to be around. But I also think he's really rare. I think most people in that situation use their fame and their accomplishments as kind of a shield to ward off criticism rather than kind of taking it down so they can show some humility.
Now, you talked about Whalen's recruiting class coming in. I believe it's next year. I think it's ranked in the top 10, maybe even number 7.
Yep.
A lot of in-state recruits and very good ones at that. So obviously that's, I'm going to say buying her time, but that's kind of this, this kind of arc of light in the distance and frankly, some better performances of late from this year's team too. Good win against Michigan State the other day, close against Indiana the other day as well. So starting to piece it together a little bit more, but as we think about these recruits, like you said, if they get to be seniors and they're still not getting this done on the court, do we go that far? Or like, when do you want to see improvement on the court to be, say, routinely challenging to be in the NCAA tournament? Because I don't think they've even gotten to that point yet.
Well, the thing I don't want to do for a program that really, again, has not been very good in general is I don't want to say, okay, boy, you have to have these artificial time constructs. And boy, if they're not good as juniors, then you got to fire Lindsay. Well, what if they were about to be good as seniors? I just think that this is not UConn. This is not Maryland with Brenda Freaks. This is a place that has had trouble attracting good coaches. It's a place that has had trouble attracting high-level talent. I just don't see any reason for impatience yet. And maybe there will be a point where I see something and say, okay, that the team's just not well coached, or okay, these players haven't gotten better. But I don't want to pretend I just don't see any reason to put up an artificial deadline for it. Let's wait and see what happens. I'm really interested to see how Whalen's teams will play when point guards and guards she recruited to be her point guards get to run her stuff. That's what I'm really interested in, because it's pretty obvious that Jasmine Powell and Lindsay were not necessarily on the same page. And what we saw with Whalen back in her playing days was as soon as you had the right coach with the right point guard, that program took off.
Coaching is not easy. Let's reduce it to that and move to another coach who has no head coaching experience either, Kevin O'Connell, new Vikings coach, presumably, at least, unless something weird happens after the Super Bowl. Another, like I said, no head coaching experience. He's coming from the Rams, where he's been a successful offensive coordinator this year, but, young, 36. It's kind of the way of the league right now. What did you think of that process and ultimately landing on Kevin O'Connell?
In general, I think I like the process. I'm impressed that they went out and hired Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah, the way they did it, the fact they're entrusting their program to somebody that young. I'm glad they had an open mind when it came to diversity candidates. And everything I've heard about Kwesi was they kept on trying to find negatives on him and they couldn't find any. And they had good sources, Stefanski, people in the 49ers organization, people around the league. So I like that. I like the fact that it was a pretty intriguing finalist group. Harbaugh, completely different from Patrick Graham, completely different from Kevin O'Connell. D'Amico Ryans, I think, could have been a really interesting candidate if he had wanted the job at this point or felt like he was going to get the job at this point. And I'm blanking.
Raheem Morris was the last
Raheem Morris. I'm sorry, Raheem Morris, the other Rams coordinator. I think that's a really interesting group. And, part of me kind of wishes Harbaugh had gotten the job just because he's a really weird, interesting guy. And he's a great NFL coach. I can't guarantee it would have worked or he would have been the right personality for what they're looking for, but I would have been really intrigued by that. Part of me wishes that Ryans wanted the job. Part of me is intrigued by Morris and Graham, although there's certainly some question marks around them just in terms of experience and past experience, all that. It's hard to argue with O'Connell's tree. It's like, it wasn't that long ago we were making Sean McVay jokes. Oh boy, anybody, if somebody had lunch with him, you got to hire him. Well, the reality is everybody who's been hired off his staff has ended up being really good. It's hard to argue with that. It doesn't guarantee that O'Connell's going to be good, but it does pique my interest.
Yeah, I think that's a fair way to put it. And going offense instead of defense makes a certain amount of sense. We often talk about the rule of opposites in coaching hires. You can't get a whole lot more opposite of Mike Zimmer than a 30-something offensive coach. That said, in the midst of their whole process, in the midst of making this hire, you get the lawsuit from Brian Flores, the former Dolphins coach, and I think it's certainly just studying it on its merit. It seems like there is a lot there with the coaching patterns and coaching hires in the NFL. The Vikings had 2 black head coaching candidates, and they passed on both of them. Now, I'm not saying they were wrong to do that. I'm not saying they can't pick the candidate they want to pick, but it certainly added a different dimension to how a lot of people, including myself, thought about the ultimate way they went about that.
Yeah. And to me, if you're going to interview Jim Harbaugh, whose main calling card is that he was an excellent NFL head coach a number of years ago, I don't know why you wouldn't interview Jim Caldwell. To me, doing what Caldwell did with the Lions, doing what he did with the Colts anytime he had a healthy quarterback, his winning percentage is off the charts when he has a quarterback who doesn't have a broken neck. To me, winning with the Lions is the equivalent of Jim Harbaugh getting the 49ers to the NFC Championship game 3 times in a row. So I would like to see Caldwell interviewed. I still think Leslie Frazier got a raw deal here and deserves another chance. Brian Flores, hey, if you want to prove to Brian Flores that it's not a racist league, how about interviewing for jobs like this? And honestly, I think I probably would have come down really hard on the Vikings in terms of their hiring practices if they hadn't hired a young, black, inexperienced general manager, and if they hadn't elevated Kevin Warren so high in their organization at a time when he was the highest ranking business side black executive in the league. So, it's really hard to crack down the Vikings because of that recent history. But if they didn't have that history, I would look at this and say, okay, I hired a inexperienced 36-year-old white guy when there's some great experienced black coaches out there.
Yep. I think that's a fair way to put it. Couple more things I want to hit with you, Jim. We talked about the Wolves a little bit at the start. What's intriguing to you in particular about this team, and what if anything, would you do in the next few days before the trading deadline?
I would be really careful before the trading deadline. And the cool thing is, I think that the Timberwolves fan base, although it's not necessarily showing up in droves right now, whether because of COVID or, history or whatever else, I think there's a large, intelligent Timberwolves fan base. And a lot of the people I follow and talk to are like, hey, don't mess this up. This is great. This is a team that plays hard, that has depth, that plays together, has good chemistry, is well coached, has a coach who gets through to these players. Don't make a move just to make a move. Don't throw away assets, to improve your team by 1%. I would be really happy to see this team not make a move and just see how this plays out.
Yeah, I think that's 2 months ago when they were kind of scuffling a little bit, I was like, yeah, that kind of feels like they're on the verge of needing to shake this up. It just seemed like something wasn't quite clicking with this team and the offense wasn't working the way it was supposed to. And now, it's probably a good reminder that we are impatient a little bit these days, and that sometimes you just need to let players play together for a while before you really know what they can do.
And listen, if you're a Timberwolves fan and you're impatient, there's a reason for that. It's a horrible franchise. It's been a horrible franchise for 30 years. But this feels different. It feels like a very rational front office. Let's be honest. Gerson Rosas, however he exited, made some hellacious trades. Gupta seems like a really savvy guy. Finch, I think, is an excellent coach and a very likable coach. I just like everything about this team right now. And that's very rare for me when it comes to the Timberwolves. So just don't mess this up. And listen, if they keep playing this way, expectations will get ratcheted up in the offseason, and then maybe they'll feel more pressure to make some kind of a deal that will make them more of a contender for a top 4 seed. Right now, I don't think they should feel pressured. I think people are enjoying this. I think they should be allowed to enjoy this.
Last thought for you, Jim. What's more likely, Wolves finish in the top 6 and avoid the play-in, or the Wild make it to the Western Conference Finals?
Oh, I think the Wolves that's a much easier task for the Wolves. I think they're playing well. They've really gotten past the more difficult part of their schedule. Top 6 is a very realistic goal. The Wild are a good team, and they play well. And once again, a team with smart management, good coaching, cohesiveness, young talent. But it's hockey. It's just harder to bet on a team getting to the conference finals. A lot of things can go wrong, including your goalie having a slump at the wrong time or a puck bouncing funny. Basketball is a much more rational sport, and I think top 6 seed is a much easier ask.
Bill Guerin's going to have to go get like some kind of honorary fancy degree from somewhere with all the big degrees in Vikings, Wolves, and Twins land, isn't he?
It's okay to have an everyman, kind of an average dude just kind of succeed. I don't think you need to have a bunch of letters after your name. That's why I never talk about my PhDs,
Multiple.
Maybe I don't have any.
Many PhDs. You can come and look at my office, look at my wall. They're all hanging on my wall right now.
Exactly. So, hey, I really think Guerin has done a heck of a job too. And you know what? I think now that Parisi and Suter are gone, I think that's a fairly likable room and franchise. And I really didn't find them all that likable when Parisi and Suter were whining behind the scenes.
Yep. Agree with all that. Jim, good stuff. Anything coming up that you want to plug a little bit here?
I hope to write out the Minnesota Aurora sometime this week. I really think it's a cool thing that they're doing, and I really like the way they're doing it. I might have an Odell Beckham column later this week. I never wanted him lumped in with all the other so-called diva wide receivers, and I think he's showing why he shouldn't have been. I'll be really interested in the Super Bowl. I think it's a really interesting matchup. And Tom Hoagie column out in the Tuesday paper, and hope to write more about Tom as the Masters grows near.
Awesome, Jim. Great stuff. We'll catch up with you soon, all right?
Thanks, Mike.
Good catching up with Jim Souhan, as always, and the talk we had about the Timberwolves and a potential trade deadline deal and about Marcus Smart, Malik Beasley, reminded me that NBA, NFL, all trades like that are all about leverage. And so I'm reading a couple different things. One, reading a report in ESPN.com about a potential Nets 76ers blockbuster with James Harden and Ben Simmons, and reading a tweet from Jeremy Fowler talking about Kevin O'Connell, the Vikings' new head coach, conveying a belief in Kirk Cousins during the interview process. I'm told he's high on him. The front office must decide on Cousins' future due to his $45 million cap hit, which we have talked about ad nauseum on this podcast and Access Vikings. But Fowler continues, many coaches interviewing for the job liked Cousins, O'Connell included. Yeah, of course, what's he going to say? I don't like him. You got to create leverage in these situations, and I don't doubt for a minute that Kevin O'Connell probably likes Kirk Cousins. He worked with him for a year in Washington. It was not Kirk Cousins' most successful season, 2017, but it was kind of a lame duck season for Kirk Cousins there in Washington that season. He probably knew he was moving on in free agency after that year, and as it turns out, moving on to the Vikings. But I wouldn't read too much into that. I think the Vikings could very well end up keeping Kirk Cousins, but the fact that Kevin O'Connell has said he likes Kirk Cousins doesn't tell me anything about what might happen down the road, because you do not create any kind of leverage by saying you don't like someone, because then all of a sudden teams start to swoop in thinking you want to get rid of this guy. So that is leverage point number one. Leverage point number two is this Nets 76ers proposal, which is just kind of baffling to me that James Harden is seemingly trying to push his way out of Brooklyn now, almost just barely a year after pushing his way out of Houston, and he's doing it with lackadaisical play, and that's just unprofessional to me. And it's just if he's trying to move on to Philadelphia by these means, by not playing well, by not performing up to his standards, I can't respect that. I can't think of another situation where I would even come close to respecting that. I can't imagine a player like Michael Jordan, LeBron James, like underperforming to try to get traded. That just says to me that's a lack of professionalism and a lack of class. That said, this potential Harden for Ben Simmons trade is fascinating to me because the 76ers have been playing this very tight, trying to ride this out with Ben Simmons and still having a good year, even though Ben Simmons has not stepped on the court. That would be a major coup for them if they were able to flip Ben Simmons for James Harden, and I don't know what that would mean exactly for the Nets, but they already have Kyrie Irving, they already have Kevin Durant. I wonder if Ben Simmons might be a slightly better fit there, a little bit of defense, a little bit of size, things like that. So all things aside, leverage being what it is in these types of deals, I'm intrigued by that one more than anything else, just because it seems like there might be a fit there. So trade deadline is Thursday. We'll see if anything happens with that. We'll see if anything happens with the Timberwolves. I'm like Jim and I talked about, I'm more inclined to think they should stand pat, but I also do love a good trade when it happens because it's fun to talk about. So trade deadline Thursday, we will see maybe a blockbuster in the works with James Harden and Ben Simmons. Let's finish with the cooler. Lovie Smith gets another chance as head coach. The Houston Texans have hired Smith to be their next head coach. Kind of love this. I love his big white beard, and I think he's had enough success in this league to warrant another chance. Remember, he took the Bears to a Super Bowl with Rex Grossman as his quarterback, which is roughly the equivalent of winning 5 Super Bowls with Tom Brady as your quarterback, or however many Belichick won. Probably was 6, I think, is with Brady as his quarterback. So good for Lovie Smith. Good for the league to have him back in head coaching, and just kind of a cool kind of out of the box. Did not see that one coming. Hire by the Texans, so that should pretty much that'll close the loop on a lot of these hiring cycles, and we'll see at the end of the day which team ends up making the hire that has the most influence. Will it be the Vikings with Kevin O'Connell? Will it be someone else? I'm not sure, but good for the Texans going with Lovie Smith. That will do it for today. Be back at it again Wednesday. Should have tons of good stuff to talk about. Timberwolves in action, Wild in action, and we'll get you again on Wednesday.